Ilhan Omar smirked directly into the cameras and branded the Vice President of the United States a hillbilly cosplay to his face, entirely convinced she had just secured the viral kill shot of her career in front of 7 million viewers. The gallery roared right on cue, delivering the exact intoxicating validation she craved. The clip exploded across digital feeds instantly, racking up 40,000 shares in just 120 seconds. An aide pumped a fist in triumph, solidifying the illusion that they had successfully manufactured the ultimate political ambush. She genuinely believed the night was completely hers, but she fundamentally misjudged her opponent because J.D. Vance offered absolutely zero reaction. He did not scowl, he did not lock eyes with her, and he withheld any predictable defensive retort. Instead, he simply flipped open his laptop. What unfolded over the ensuing 3/4 of an hour as he ruthlessly and methodically read, line by line, tab by tab, and number by number, is the precise reason her campaign will never dare post that initial insult on her official social platforms. She went fishing for a cheap, manufactured viral sensation and ended up triggering a forensic financial slaughter on national television. The broadcast was barely 6 minutes deep, and the Congresswoman was undeniably steering the narrative. She had arrived armed to the teeth after a grueling 2-day preparation boot camp, backed by handlers who knew precisely which persona to project into the American living room. They shelved the dry, policy-quoting committee member and unleashed the hardened survivor. This was the narrative she wore, like Kevlar, the refugee who navigated a war-torn origin, a displacement camp, a foreign landscape, and an unfamiliar tongue, only to eventually make the halls of the United States Congress feel entirely inadequate in her presence. That specific iteration of the Congresswoman was a force of nature, a figure her loyalists idolized, her rivals feared, and the press corps documented relentlessly. She launched into a blistering 4-minute monologue covering reductions in medical aid, stringent border enforcement, controversial travel restrictions, and her roots in Mogadishu, Kenya. She detailed her 4 years in a camp and arriving on American soil at 12 years old with empty pockets. She delivered the monologue with her trademark defiance, stripping away any hint of softness or self-pity, practically daring anyone in the room to diminish a journey she had earned word by agonizing word. Then came the pivot. She turned toward Vance, deploying that signature chin tilt her inner circle referred to as the launch angle. She accused the Yale-educated hillbilly of lecturing a hardened refugee about real struggle. She declared his presence was not a display of courage, but merely an act of cosplay. The venue practically shook. It was not the polite clapping of a civic debate, but the sharp electric reaction of a crowd watching someone pull the pin on a rhetorical grenade and toss it across the table. Journalists in the press pool scrambled for their devices in unison. The insult was already dominating trending topics before the audience could even catch its breath. Watching the monitors backstage from the green room, her communications director fired off a single word to their secure group chat, typing boom. Everything was proceeding exactly to script. Manufacture the outrage, let the digital ecosystem carry the weight, and wake up the following morning to a barrage of chyrons and pre-drafted fundraising emails capitalizing on the momentum. It was a well-worn playbook she had executed 100 times, and it had never failed her. However, the moderator shifted the floor to Vance, and the entire trajectory of the story fractured. The vice president refused to swallow the bait. He ignored the hillbilly jab. He ignored the cosplay accusation. He completely bypassed the refugee narrative, the travel ban rhetoric, and the healthcare talking points. He offered zero response because his attention was entirely consumed by the screen in front of him, proving he was not even listening. His laptop was active, his eyes were locked on the glowing display, and his fingers navigated the keyboard with the chilling, unhurried precision of a tactician who had been plotting this exact confrontation for far longer than 48 hours. He brought something to the stage that no amount of debate preparation could counter, because she showed up to trade rhetorical blows while he arrived to conduct an audit. He let 5 seconds of heavy silence hang in the air. Without lifting his gaze, he acknowledged the introduction with a flat monotone, announcing that the hillbilly would now read directly from Federal Election Commission filings. It was a single sentence delivered without an ounce of anger or wounded pride. The delivery was so incredibly flat that it barely registered as a counterattack, which is precisely why it was so devastating. It broadcasted to the entire room that her carefully crafted insult had passed straight through him like light through a window pane, leaving absolutely no trace and changing nothing. The uproarious laughter in the venue dissolved into a thick, uncomfortable uncertainty. It is a very specific type of unease that washes over a crowd when they watch a fighter take a clean hit to the jaw only to see the opponent smile back. Behind the scenes, the communications director's celebratory text sat dead on the screen, unanswered. He stared at his tablet in disbelief. In 2 decades of navigating political communications, he had never witnessed a candidate absorb a character assassination on live television and retaliate with tax compliance documents. Vance began laying out the ledger. He detailed how her congressional campaign committee reported $2,780,000 in payments to a Washington-based political consulting firm known as the E Street Group between 2019 and 2020. He stated that the owner of this firm was a man named Tim Minett. He let that name breathe for a fraction of a second. Tim Minett is the Congresswoman's husband, whom she married in 2020. He carefully outlined how those disbursements, totaling $2,780,000, began flowing during the genesis of their personal relationship and persisted throughout their marriage. This was donor capital funneled directly into a corporate entity controlled by the man she was dating and subsequently married. He paused to ensure the gravity of that arrangement sank in. He explained that citizens who believed in her cause, people who scraped together $10, $25, or $50 to fuel a movement, were unknowingly subsidizing a company owned by the man their representative went home to at night. To anchor these abstract figures to reality, Vance introduced a specific donor. He named Amamira, a prep cook residing in the Little Mogadishu neighborhood of the representative's district. He noted she earned $26,000 annually and had faithfully contributed $50 every single month to the campaign since 2018, amounting to $3,600 over a 6-year span. He cited an interview where this prep cook explained her dedication, stating she donated because the Congresswoman was one of them. Vance framed this as profound sacrifice. He painted the picture of a working woman skipping basic comforts so her elected official could fight for her neighborhood. And he explicitly stated that this hard-earned money was routed directly to the E Street Group, straight to Tim Minett, straight to the spouse. Omar leaned into her microphone, attempting to construct a firewall. She insisted that campaign payments to political consultants were standard practice across America. Vance, still refusing to break eye contact with his screen, delivered an 8-word dismissal. He stated that standard practice does not include marrying the consultant. Those 8 words landed with the undeniable permanence of a knife sticking upright in a cutting board, vibrating slightly, impossible to ignore, and impossible to extract without acknowledging its presence. Her mouth opened, then closed. She had built fortresses to defend her patriotism, her faith, her immigration history, and her foreign policy stances against Israel. She was entirely unequipped to defend against Federal Election Commission filings because paperwork is tedious, and tedious things rarely disrupt town halls. Yet, on this night, the mundane became the weapon of choice, slicing right through every defense she had erected because her armor was designed for a completely different style of combat. Vance clicked open a new browser tab, The gesture established a methodical rhythm, each click representing a new door, pushing the working-class donors $50 further away from grassroots activism and closer to wherever $2,780,000 goes when it enters a family. He introduced the second tab, revealing a Virginia winery co-owned by Tim Minette. He laid out how, in 2022, a private Washington investor handed over $300,000 to Minette for a stake in this winery, lured by the promise of a 200% return. The promised return evaporated. The investor was forced to initiate a lawsuit to recover the capital, resulting in a quiet settlement while the winery itself ultimately shuttered. Vance crystallized the timeline for the audience. The campaign funnels $2,780,000 to the husband's consulting firm. The husband leverages his position to court external investors for a private winery venture. A citizen hands over $300,000 expecting returns. The capital vanishes, litigation ensues, and the business collapses. It is a masterclass in dissecting political proximity, acting as a magnet for questionable financial schemes. Then came the third tab. He introduced Rose Lake Capital, described as a venture capital firm operated by Minette. Vance noted the firm's digital storefront claimed to manage a staggering $60 billion in assets under management. He let that figure hang in the silence. $60 billion would easily rank this operation among the most formidable venture capital titans in the country, dwarfing established Wall Street institutions. But there was a glaring caveat. The firm held no registration with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Its listed corporate headquarters was a rented desk inside a shared co-working space. The website featured no personnel roster, zero investment history, and no verifiable public record of managing any capital. $60 billion in claimed assets, no regulatory registration, a rented desk, and the architect of it all is married to a sitting member of Congress who listed his financial interests on a federal form. He locked his eyes onto the camera lens, bypassing Omar entirely to address the 7 million living rooms. He traced the journey of the prep cook's monthly $50 sacrifice. She sends her money believing it funds community advocacy. Instead, it reaches a consulting firm, which then funds a winery, which then defrauds a private investor. When that enterprise fails, a phantom venture capital firm materializes, boasting $60 billion in assets from a rented hourly desk. And the central figure orchestrating this labyrinth is married to the woman who collected the prep cook's money, 6 doors. The working class funds traveled through 6 distinct doors, ending behind a desk rented by the hour. Vance's cadence shifted. The flat delivery pulled back into a quieter register, the tone he utilized when abstract spreadsheets transformed into sworn signatures on federal forms. He wanted to discuss 3 specific numbers. The screen displayed 3 separate financial disclosure filings side by side. They were identical forms, addressing the exact same line item submitted across 3 different years, yielding 3 wildly divergent answers. He read the 2023 disclosure, where Minette's total business assets were valued at $51,000, encompassing the consulting firm and a share of the small winery. He then pulled up the 2024 disclosure filed in May 2025. The identical line item now claimed total business assets ranging between $6 million and $30 million. The winery was suddenly valued up to $5 million, and the unregistered co-working space venture firm was appraised between $5 million and $25 million. Finally, he presented an amended 2024 disclosure filed in March 2026. The valuation plummeted to a range between $18,000 and $95,000, with the venture firm completely wiped from the record, listed as none. 3 official federal documents on the screen. The initial valuation of $51,000 skyrocketed to $30 million, only to crash back down to $95,000. 3 completely contradictory answers to the exact same question, all signed under oath. The representative had previously categorized this as an accounting error of $29.9 million on a sworn document. Vance brought the abstract math back to the human element for a second time. He reminded the audience that Amamira earns $26,000 a year. The $29.9 million discrepancy between the initial filing and the correction equates to 1,150 years of that prep cook's total annual salary. He stated unequivocally that such a gap is not an accounting error, it is a different answer to the same question, asked under oath. Omar reached for her water. It was a rapid, involuntary reflex from a woman who was not actually thirsty, but desperately needed to occupy her hands so they wouldn't sit idly on a table where 7 million pairs of eyes could track their uncertainty. Her legal counsel, seated behind her, leaned forward to whisper an instruction. She offered a microscopic shake of her head. It was invisible to the gallery, but caught perfectly by the broadcast lenses. It was the distinct shake of a client realizing her attorney just advised her to stop talking, only to comprehend she had been frozen in silence for 4 agonizing minutes. For a political operator who built an entire career on vocal defiance and never remaining silent, that specific silence was deafening. She pushed back. She fought back because survival instinct is the core trait of a refugee. They do not sit quietly while an adversary reads a dossier about their family in front of a nation that already harbors factions wanting them deported. She marshaled every ounce of moral authority she had cultivated over 7 years. She wielded the story, the identity, and the lived experience of a woman who survived horrors the man reading the spreadsheet could not possibly fathom. She chastised the vice president for fixating on her husband's business dealings while ignoring the children separated from families at the border. She accused him of dodging the reality of travel bans, tearing communities apart, and federal raids terrorizing constituents who had resided there for decades. She framed his focus on consulting fees as the desperate tactic of an administration bankrupt on policy, forced to audit the very people who fight back. Her voice cracked, not with frailty, but with genuine, unadulterated fury. It was the profound anger of a woman who believed every syllable she spoke, who navigated the camp, the new language, and the new country, emerging with a congressional seat and an unshakable conviction that any scrutiny of her finances was a thinly veiled assault on her right to exist in that space. The gallery stirred. Her loyalists, of which there were many, initiated a swell of applause. For a fleeting second, the room belonged to her again, filling the space with the undeniable resonance of a voice that survived everything and demanded complete submission. Vance simply waited. He deployed the same chilling patience he utilized during previous hostile town halls, understanding perfectly that emotional storms eventually run out of sky. When the room settled, he spoke quietly without lifting his eyes from the screen. He stated clearly that he had not uttered a single word regarding her religion, her immigration status, the travel ban, or the border. He had strictly confined his commentary to Federal Election Commission filings, sworn financial disclosures, and the physical address of a shared workspace. He reminded her that federal documents possess numbers, and numbers are an unbending reality. He dismantled her martyrdom complex, clarifying she was not facing an audit because she was a courageous fighter. She was under the microscope because $2,780,000 flowed directly to her husband's company. Her spouse's winery defrauded an investor. His venture firm claimed $60 billion from a rented desk, and her sworn disclosure fluctuated by $29.9 million. He delivered the final blow, stating this was not an attack on a refugee, but simply arithmetic. That single word, arithmetic, landed with the undeniable force of a period at the end of an exhaustingly long sentence. It slammed the door shut on her escape route, severing the emotional tether she tried to establish between numbers and identity, between filings and faith, between $2,780,000 and border policy. Vance refused to cross that threshold. He remained firmly planted in the room with the ledger, and within the confines of mathematics, there is no identity shield, no refugee narrative, and no amount of gallery applause capable of transforming a massive, documented financial discrepancy into an innocent misunderstanding. For the first time in 47 minutes, Vance closed his laptop, and the screen went dark. He finally shifted his gaze directly to her, ignoring the cameras and the gallery. It was only his second glance in her direction the entire evening. The first was a brief, empty acknowledgement when she dropped the initial insult, the look of a man registering a meaningless sound. This second look was entirely different. It stayed fixed. He referenced her opening salvo, noting she had labeled him a hillbilly playing dress-up. He brushed it off, casually mentioning he had endured worse critiques from far better opponents. He shared a piece of wisdom from his grandmother, who raised him during his mother's rehabilitation, stating that when critics attack your footwear, it is simply because they lack the capacity to attack your work. He waited almost an hour to address the jab. By inserting 47 minutes of forensic accounting, investment fraud, phantom corporate addresses, and a $29.9 million disclosure anomaly between the insult and his response, he fundamentally altered the nature of her initial attack. What started as a calculated strike was exposed as a desperate distraction, and all 7 million viewers could see with crystalline clarity that she threw the insult solely to keep them from looking at the balance sheet. He brought the focus back to Amamira, reiterating her monthly $50 donations, her skipped comforts, and her grueling double shifts. He stated she gives because she believes, and she deserves a complete accounting, not from him, but from the elected official she trusted. She deserved to know how her money bypassed a movement and traveled through 6 doors to a rented desk. He concluded by addressing the cosplay accusation head-on, inviting America to determine who was genuinely playing a role, the man presenting verifiable federal records, or the politician whose grassroots funding ended up at an unregistered venture capital firm claiming $60 billion from a shared workspace. He did not offer another syllable. He secured his laptop, aligning the edges and placing his pen parallel, projecting the quiet finality of an auditor closing an investigation. Omar offered no rebuttal. It wasn't for a lack of vocabulary, as she always has something to say, but because the foundational reality of the room had completely collapsed around her. The stage shifted like theatrical lighting, exposing painted plywood and hollow props. She had built her entire strategy upon a fleeting insult. The insult secured 2 minutes of glory. His spreadsheet dominated the remaining 47. In the ruthless calculus of broadcast television, 47 always crushes 2. She departed through a side exit. This was not born of media aversion, but a direct compliance with her attorney's instructions. Fleeing through a service corridor after a publicized hearing is the universal signal that the event was an unmitigated disaster. Her communications chief stood waiting by the vehicle, clutching 3 pre-drafted press releases. The triumphant draft declared she exposed his hypocrisy. The neutral draft claimed a productive dialogue. And the defensive draft vowed retaliation against politically motivated attacks. None of them contained contingencies for defending the E Street Group. None addressed $2,780,000. None addressed a shared workspace address, a fraudulent winery, or a $29.9 million disclosure error. They prepared for a political skirmish. He brought a forensic audit, and there was no prepared statement for accounting. Inside the vehicle, total silence reigned. Her smartphone vibrated endlessly against the upholstery, drowning in a flood of digital notifications. Its software was never designed to process. She ignored it. She already knew the contents because she had watched her meticulously crafted viral ambition systematically buried beneath an avalanche of arithmetic, erased as indifferently as a wave swallowing a sandcastle. The digital fallout was brutal and immediate. For the initial 6 hours, she appeared victorious. The hillbilly cosplay soundbite saturated every network, feed, and group chat. The clip was flawless, sharp, and devastating. Fundraising metrics surged, mentions spiked. Her team drafted victory laps. The internet crowned her the undisputed champion. Then, the counter-narrative deployed. A 43-second clip of Vance delivering the marrying the consultant line surfaced. It contained zero shouting, zero theatrics, just a man reading a document and a woman falling silent. It generated 11 million views by sunrise. The subsequent clip, tracing the prep cook's money through the 6 doors to the rented desk, hit 14 million views. This footage breached the containment of political echo chambers, infiltrating financial forums and oversight watchdogs who cared deeply about campaign finance ethics. People entirely unconcerned with cosplay insults were fiercely invested in $2,780,000 flowing to a spouse. The final clip, displaying the 3 wildly contradictory federal forms side by side, secured 9 million views. It required absolutely no partisan commentary to suggest systemic deception. By the 3rd day, the audit footage surpassed 34 million combined views. The agonizing irony, visible to her staff but impossible to mitigate, was that her initial viral insult acted as the perfect on-ramp. Viewers clicked for the entertainment of the jab, but they stayed for the devastating reality of the financial disclosures. She had single-handedly assembled the audience for her own political destruction, providing the vice president with unprecedented reach, completely free of charge, all delivered with a smile. In the ensuing week, her office attempted to deploy the identity shield, releasing statements framing the scrutiny as a targeted smear against a marginalized demographic. The press release actively ignored the E Street Group, the massive payouts, the winery, the venture capital firm, the rented desk, and the $29.9 million discrepancy. But the public conversation had already shifted. Identity politics, an impenetrable shield for 7 years, was no longer the subject. The subject was arithmetic, and arithmetic possesses no identity. Federal regulators officially opened an inquiry into the campaign disbursements. While technically a preliminary bureaucratic step, an inquiry launched on the heels of 34 million people scrutinizing your ledgers on national television is a full-blown headline. By the 2nd week, the shockwaves reached her home district. The working-class Somali-American enclaves in Minneapolis did not react uniformly, but a profound current of embarrassment washed through the community. It was the specific humiliation of a base that had fiercely protected her for years, only to learn via televised tax forms that their grassroots sacrifices funded her husband's firm. A local radio host voiced a previously unthinkable question, asking out loud where the community's money actually went. It was a microscopic fracture in a seemingly impenetrable political wall, and such cracks spread faster than any damage control team can manage. By week 3, capitalizing on the vulnerability, her primary challenger launched targeted media buys featuring the prep cook's voice. The 15-second advertisement demanded accountability for the $2,780,000. It broadcasted on local radio in the exact neighborhood where Amamira resides, targeting the precise audience Omar assumed would never rebel. Leaked internal polling revealed her support had tanked to 49%. It was an apocalyptic metric, the lowest ever recorded for the incumbent in a district she had dominated since 2018. Her challenger was closing the gap with a fraction of the name recognition and funding, and the primary was merely 6 weeks away. Her team attempted to suppress the numbers, but a metric showing an incumbent bleeding support in a heavily favored district never stays buried. The resulting headlines cemented her vulnerability, exposing that she tumbled below the survival threshold simply because a politician from Ohio opened a laptop and counted to 6. She labeled him a cosplay act, he called her bluff, and the constituency that believed in her for 7 years finally demanded a transparent accounting of the funds. They wanted the truth about the 6 doors and the rented desk. She was left wishing she had never uttered the phrase hillbilly cosplay, because without that initial spark, the ensuing 47 minutes of financial devastation would have never captured the nation's attention. But the data had been broadcasted. The numbers remain stubbornly intact, indifferent to political rhetoric, immune to identity shields, and completely unconcerned with whatever derogatory labels you assign to the man reading them into the public record.